the progress. We finished Aleph, we're now on Bet. Okay? So we're talking about the liability of a slaughterer who does not perform a proper shechita. So Shmuel said an expert slaughterer was given an animal to slaughter and bungled it up by slaughtering it improperly and rendering it a nevela, is liable to pay the owner for the animal damage. Okay? Obviously. For the Gemara describes in Gas as two factors, both a damager and negligent. And it's as though the owner said to him, slaughter the animal for me here, where the trachea and esophagus are located. And the slaughterer damaged the animal by slaughtering it elsewhere in a different part of the neck. So we want to know actually what's it talking about, because obviously there's only a proper place to slaughter the animal. So the first issue that we're going to have to discuss is that to be considered an expert slaughterer, you have to have a certain amount of case history. You know, one of the things is that you start off slaughtering small birds, etc., and then if you look at chulin, you graduate up from there. And the reason why you don't actually start off on small birds, it's interesting. The Torah Chaim says you actually end off on small birds. It's almost your graduation test. Why? Because they're the most difficult to slaughter. So when you can take something that's a minute amount of dexterity and just nick it in the way that you don't sever past the esophagus or the trachea, etc., and you do it in the perfect way, in a microscopic level, that's when you're considered an expert. But to slaughter 3 larger animals means that you get a certain expertise for larger animals. So let me just tell you how it's defined. It's interesting. I looked into this. It's like you've got a code 8 driver in South Africa, and he can drive a normal sedan. Then you've got a code 10 that can drive Pentechnic trucks. You get what I'm saying? Then you've got a motorcycle license. So as you graduate, you're allowed to drive more advanced and more complicated machinery. It's the same thing with slaughtering. Get different sort of shechita modules, which I never knew about, guys, by the way. I don't know if you knew about them. I certainly didn't. So what are we talking about this case where he bungled it up? Basically saying that he slaughtered. I thought, can you off on mute? Okay. Right. So what we're saying is he bungled it up by slaughtering the animal in the wrong place because the animal jumped during the slaughter. And what should he have done is he should have tied down the animal. So we want to know, is there liability as far as that's concerned? Okay, because if he didn't know where he was cutting or he cut too far, etc., that's one degree of negligence and damage. The other degree is when you haven't prepared the animal properly. So, although, you know, so when we say if an animal dies without a proper shechita, it's deemed to be a nevela, which means that you can't use it, guys. You can't eat it. And where's that? That's in Devarim chapter 14, verse 21, and it's known as the avatuma, which is in Vayikra Leviticus chapter 11, verse 39 to 50. You can't even consume it. That's that's a problem. That's for sure a problem. Okay, so the Gemara basically says, why is he considered both a damager and negligent? Surely is one or the other, and surely the one describes the other. So the Gemara says, look, if it said he's only a damager, I would have said that this ruling, that the slaughterer is liable to pay, applies only where the slaughterer is working for a fee. But where he's working for free, at no charge, gratis, he's not liable. Therefore, Shmuel informs us that he is negligent to teach that even if he was not working for a fee, he's liable. So let me tell you where this comes from in terms of source. When a person does damage, he's liable even in the case of unforeseen occurrence. Okay? Where's that in Bava Kamma 82b? So, like, you back up a truck or whatever and suddenly a car bolts out. You're liable if you borrowed somebody's car. So had Shmuel merely said that he's a damager, we could have thought that Shmuel means to say that a slaughterer is liable, not because he's a damager, but because he has the same level of responsibility as a damager. meaning that he's liable even when he's not negligent. So what would that mean? In essence, an expert's failure to perform his craft properly is not deemed an act of negligence. Why? Because if you're a novice, there's no reason why you should ever pick up a scalpel and start cutting somebody. They're going to end up dead on the operating table. But if you're an expert, why would there be negligence if you had an expertise? Because you're entitled to do surgery. So that would mean, in essence, that an expert's failure to perform his craft properly isn't deemed as an act of negligence. You could come to that conclusion. And Shmuel would be referring only to an expert who slaughtered for a fee. So that's known as a shomer zahar, meaning a paid custodian. And that person, because they're paid, you have a higher level of expectation, and they're liable, like a damager, for unforeseen occurrences. So when Rashi states that a paid slaughterer would be liable for unforeseen occurrences, it doesn't mean that it'd be liable for every occurrence. It means that as a paid custodian or a service provider that's charged a fee, is liable only for the unforeseen occurrences such as theft or loss, but not circumstances that are completely beyond his control. So if, however, the expert slaughterer slaughters the animal for free, if a shochet slaughters the animal for free, he's no more liable than an unpaid custodian, because what he's doing is he's doing the guy a favor, just like somebody that's looking after your good that no money is doing you a favor. And therefore, we can't hold him liable except when he's grossly negligent, and he would not be liable to pay. So Shmuel actually adds both terms, guys. He says that he's negligent to teach that an expert, guys, am I losing connectivity with you? Can you hear me? Did I lose you?
Guys, you did briefly, you did, yeah.
Okay, I've just got a bit of a line issue. Apologies. So what I'm saying is that you would feel that if somebody did an expert work for you and they didn't do it properly, say you wanted somebody to do an accounting looking over at your taxes and they didn't charge you, but they made a mistake. It's very difficult to sue them when they did you a favor, okay? Especially since they're experts in this field. So therefore, Shmuel takes great care to use the word negligence as well as damage, okay? So because you have to treat this person as though, even if they did it for free, as a paid custodian, which means they're liable for negligence. And therefore, that's the reason that they have to pay. You can't see them even if they did it for free. For example, let me give you a perfect example. Somebody decides to do surgery on your beloved pooch, a vet, for 10 years at the SPCA. Now, they haven't charged you, but they were negligent and killed your pooch. Wouldn't be none too fond if they turn around and say, but I never charged you. It's not good enough. It's actually not good enough. So that's the problem, is that there's proper precautions that you need to do in terms of preparing the animal. In other words, it's not just the expertise of the shchita within the trachea and the esophagus. What actually has to happen then is you have to see that the animal is tied down, because any time that you bring a blade to the animal, it's going to jump. How would you like me? I was at the dentist today, spent 20 grand. And the dentist says to me this afternoon, he said, listen, I gave you injections this morning. They've worn off because we've had everything made and fitted, and it's a few hours later, it's the afternoon. He said, it'll be a minute, but you can choose to get an injection, but it'll just be a minute. What he didn't tell me, the fool, is it wasn't a minute. It was like an eon, and I had no injection. And he's busy drilling and tapping away on raw nerves. I nearly gripped him by the balls. It's just a stupid thing to do. It's a stupid thing to do. So what it made me do is it made me think of this Gemara, that you tie the animal down before you work on it, because it's going to flinch if it feels any pain. It's natural. And that's what's considered negligent. Not that he was remiss in how to cut. If you don't tie the animal down properly, you're not taking proper precautions. So this Gemara implies that where the slaughterer was not in fact negligent, he can't be held liable unless he receives a fee and is a paid custodian, who is indeed liable for unforeseen circumstances. So the Rishonim question why that's so, and the bottom line of it is that it could be that he's seen as an unpaid custodian and therefore lesser responsibility. So when you use, according to the Ramban, that a person who does damage is considered for sure liable if they had done it with expertise. And even if they're liable, there is a certain amount of damage, but you have to use the word negligent because there's an issue of expertise and there's an issue of payment. Kevin, I know you're exhausted. I just need to knock along with you now. So
I am actually I'm not sleeping, but I'm close.
I know. I watch you guys like hawks.
I'm a bit dopey.
Okay. So why did Shmuel have to say the damager is negligent? Why did it not suffice for him to say simply he's a damager? So the Gemara answers, if he only said he's a damager, I would have said this ruling that the slaughterer is liable to pay applies only where the slaughterer is working for a fee. But where he's not working for a fee and he's working gratis at no charge, he's not liable. Therefore, he informs us that he is negligent to teach that even if he was not working for a fee, he is liable. Shmuel's ruling that an expert slaughterer slaughters improperly is liable even if he works for free at no charge is challenged. Why is it challenged? Because Bava Kamma bar Guria challenged Shmuel in the following brisa. In the case of one who gives an animal to a slaughterer who slaughters it improperly and renders it a nevela, if he's an expert slaughterer, he is not liable. If he's a novice, he is liable. So what it's saying there is that a person is liable if they're a novice because they have no business being in the slaughtering business and therefore it's a recipe for disaster. But if he's an expert slaughterer, he's entitled to slaughter and therefore there's no liability. That was the reasoning given by Rav Chama bar Guria. And it also said, but if the owner of the animal gives him a fee, then whether he's a novice or an expert, he's liable. In other words, the minute you take money for it, then in that particular case, you've taken on the responsibility of being culpable for your decisions. Just like if you become somebody's tax consultant, you can sue your tax practitioner for giving bad advice, because if a friend did you a favor, can't exactly sue him. So it's saying the first thing that you've got to look at is the fact that he's functional. The second thing is that it's better that you pay a slight fee to be able to make the person liable. So Shmuel replies he didn't agree with Rav Chama bar Guria because he said, may your brain become muddled. I don't think that's an expression of praise. Okay? So the Gemara relates, another one of the rabbis came and also challenged Shmuel from the same brisa. And Shmuel said to him, now, you're going to receive the same sort of backlashing and treatment that I just gave your colleague in an insult, because I actually said to both of a ruling in accordance with Rabbi Meir. And the two of you basically replied to me and challenged me from a brisa authored by the rabbis. So you don't actually know what you're doing, because I, Shmuel, am giving you a source from Rabbi Meir. You challenging me by the issue of the rabbis. What you should be doing is challenging me in terms of Rabbi Meir's opinion, and is it consistent with his other opinions? Why don't you scrutinize my words? For I'll say he is a damager. He is negligent. It's as though the owner said to him, slaughter the animal here, and he slaughtered it elsewhere. So what he's basically saying there is that Shmuel was stressing the fact that the animal was slaughtered in the wrong place, and on account of something that the slaughterer failed to seal to, meaning that the animal jumped during the slaughter. So that's negligence, because even though he knew the proper place to begin the slaughtering, is that if you don't take proper precautions to strap the animal down before you slaughter it, if you create the animal to be a nevela and it's a loss to the owner, failure to take those sort of precautions constitutes negligence. It's not just about slaughtering it properly. Okay? So it's Rabbi Meir who says that a person must pay attention and take the necessary precautions not to damage another's property. So now the Gemara's guys going to ask where Rabbi Meir is referring to Shmuel's statement. So which ruling of Rabbi Meir indicates that Shmuel subscribes to this view? Perhaps you will say the following of Rabbi Meir, Kuf Lamed Nun. So what's that? It's an acronym or mnemonic for the following, because you learn in a Mishnah and it's in 45b. Guys, we discussed this before. And the Mishnah discusses the owner's liability for an ox that commits damage under the category of Keren. Remember Keren when he, when he charges somebody, or he damages somebody with his body, or he stamps on somebody. So when we learned 45b, I was also in the Mams and Koti, by the way, and we were talking about how you restrain an animal. So, what did it encompass? Abnormal acts that an animal does with intent to inflict damage, goring, kicking, etc. We did it in 15b. I was in Job. 45b. I was in Koti. So in the Torah, it says in Shemot chapter 21, verse 36, that with respect to Keren damage, an owner is liable only to pay when the owner didn't guard it. So we learn that if the owner did guard it properly, but it managed to untangle itself and do damage, the owner isn't liable. So there's different Tanaitic opinions, etc. Do you remember how stringent Rabbi Meir's opinion was? And that was, it didn't matter if he tied the animal down properly, there's liability. In other words, what did we learn? If the ox's owner tied it with a rein or locked the gate in front of it properly, and it went out and it did damage, whether it was tam or nuad, he is liable. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So what it's saying in that particular case is, even if there's an unusually strong wind that blew down the door, and the owner walked out of its stall, or this animal went crazy, perhaps it was a weak manufactured strap or a rein. Either way, Rabbi Meir says if it does damage, you're responsible. So what we are saying is perhaps this Mishnah demonstrates liability, that if you don't take precautions and strap down the animal, if an unusual event occurs that it flinches, even though it's so quick the shchita, it generally doesn't, then there's liability. Because even when the rein was strong, if it's a manufacturing default, it's considered negligence, because you should check the rein beforehand. You should make sure there's not an adverse wind. You should always make sure that even unusual circumstances take care of, not just the average. And therefore we say maybe this is a proof from Shmuel that Rabbi Meir is saying if you don't strap down the animal, there's liability, even if you know how to do shchita. So the Gemara says maybe there's another reason. So it says Ravi will suggest that Shmuel's source is this ruling by Rabbi Meir that we learned in the following Mishnah. We learned this recently, well, we're going to learn it, but it also deals with it in 100b. If one gives wool to a dyer to dye it red and he dyed it black, or he gave him to dye it black and he dyed it red, the Rabbi Meir says the dyer pays him the value of his wool. Perhaps you will say that the Mishnah demonstrates that Rabbi Meir holds that one is liable for not having taken precautions to protect against an unusual event, like the guy was forgetful. But the Gemara is saying, listen, this is not necessarily a proof, because there is an opinion, according to this exposition with Rabbi Meir, that it says the dyer intentionally burned it and took it away from him, meaning there was, it's not as if it was done by mistake, which Rabbi Meir would kind of forgive. He said that there was an intentional sabotage in this case. So we were saying, all right, so we seem not to be able to do the source of the original when he never tied down the animal properly. And the reason is why not? Because it seems actually pretty plausible. So the reason is because you might say that the Mishnah demonstrates that Rabbi Meir holds that one is liable not having taken precautions to protect against an unusual event. And the Gemara is saying that's not so, because this disputes is based on the various differing exposition of the verses. So we are saying that Rabbi Meir, you can't use this other Gemara that we learned in 45b Bava Kamma, because if it was based on the fact that Rabbi Meir's reason was logical, and he said, listen, you've got to assume the worst and you've got to prepare for the worst. If you're not, you're negligent. Great, that's a great backup proof for not tying the animal down. But you can't, because the reason why Rabbi Meir argues this fact about tying the animal up and being liable is because of how he interprets the pasuk, not because of his logic about taking extraordinary precautions. And since all the Tanaim argue with him about how to interpret the pasuk, that's not a proof of logic or a rationale behind why he has to tie the animal down for shchita. Can't be used as a proof. Do you see that, guys? There was a different reason. There was a scriptural source. So the Gemara is saying, okay, you can't use that source. The Gemara says we do have one source. And that was, we learned this to which Shmuel refers, this case of Rabbi Meir's ruling, was taught in the Brisa. You must remember this. If one's pitcher broke in the public domain and he did not remove it, or his camel fell and it did not stand up, Rabbi Meir says he's liable for the damage, but the sages say he's not liable for the damage under the laws of man, but he's liable under the laws of heaven. So what we're basically saying there is that if somebody suffered from maybe broken shards of a pot plant that dropped in the public domain or a fallen camel, the owner is liable for having created the hazard because he should have picked it up. He should have picked up the camel. That's one aspect. The rabbis say, listen, he's not considered as having created a hazard in the public domain. He's not liable under the laws of man because it was an accident. However, he's morally bound to remove it from the public's path. At that case, even the rabbis say he becomes liable, because if he fails to do so and it causes damage, he's definitely under a divine obligation to pay, but it's not an obligation that is enforceable by the courts because it's grama. So one of the definitions of grama indirect is that there's a time delay between the cause and the devastating effects of it. I still battle with it. If they hold somebody responsible in Shemaim, I see Rabbi Meir's point of view that there should be liability and culpability on earth because he caused it. He left shards in the public domain. But there was another explanation, and this is very interesting, is that Rabbi Meir, which would even sit well with you guys, and I'll tell you what it is. And it has been established for us that they're disputing whether one who trips is considered negligent. So there's a commentary on the 29th daf of Bava Kamma, if you remember, if you look on Aleph, that the dispute pertains to where a person was carrying a pitcher, like a pitcher of water or oil, and he tripped and the pitcher broke, or where he tripped, the animal tripped over him. So the sages say, listen, I tripped, it's an unavoidable accident. But according to Rabbi Meir, so therefore he wasn't liable for creating a hazard, and he should remove the debris, but even if he doesn't, there's a delay, therefore he's not liable. Rabbi Meir holds him accountable in two ways, guys. Firstly, he's saying that tripping can be avoided, because if you walk like an idiot and you trip, you're not looking where you're going. That's negligence. It's deemed negligent for not having taken the proper precautions when you're walking. If you walk in South Africa and you don't look below your feet and there's a pothole, you should have looked. This is Africa. What did you expect? And the second negligence is not removing it properly quickly. And he says you're liable under the laws of man. So since the hazard was created through his negligence, he's liable to pay for any subsequent damage that it causes. So according to Rabbi Meir, it clearly demonstrates to Shmuel that the contention is that the proper precautions are needed to be made, and the failure to tie down the animal means that the animal might flinch during the shechita, therefore you are responsible. And therefore, Shmuel, who holds by Rabbi Meir, is saying that unless you tie down the animal, you're responsible if the shechita goes south and the animal becomes in the valley. You have to pay for it. You've got to assume the animal might flinch. So the Gemara cites another Amoraic ruling regarding an expert slaughterer who slaughters improperly. Rabbi Bava Kamma said, the name of Rav Yochanan, an expert slaughterer who was given an animal to slaughter and bungled by slaughtering it improperly and rendering it an availor, is liable to pay the animal's owner for the damage. And this applies even if it's an expert slaughterer. It's the slaughter of Tzipori. So Tzipori were known as the world's best. So even if you have that level of expertise, and you see, there was a concept then that if you reach those levels of being able to be graded, in other words, you had your accreditation and certification in that particular sort of shita, already have proven yourself, and therefore there might not be liability because you're already an expert. And this is saying, no, it's not good enough. Even if you're amongst the best in the world, there's liability. Because the Gemara challenges Rabbi Bava Kamma's attribution of the to Rav Yochanan. He said, did Rav Yochanan even say this? As Rabbi Bava Kamma said, a case of a slaughterer who slaughtered improperly is actually brought before Rav Yochanan in the synagogue of Ma'on. And Rav Yochanan said to the slaughterer, "Go and bring proof that you're an expert in slaughtering chickens, and I will free you from liability." Meaning, he didn't want to see some paperwork that he got the certificate. He wanted to see him slaughter a chicken. Guys, am I losing you with the connection?
No, you're fine.
Okay. So it's saying, Rav Yochanan is saying, listen, let me see it. I don't want to see your certificate. So that's a questioning of Rabbi Bava Kamma's attribution of the ruling to Rav Yochanan. Because here's a case where he says, I don't believe the certification. It's not good enough. I want to see you do it. So the Gemara says, listen, there's no difficulty. They're not a contradiction. Because in the incident where Rav Yochanan ruled that an expert is not liable, he did the slaughtering for free at no charge. But here in the ruling of the case where he wanted to see if the guy was an expert slaughterer and said, come bring it, prove it with the chicken, how you slaughter. That's when he's charging a fee. Do you get what I'm saying? So in contrast to Shmuel, who rules in accordance with Rabbi Meir that failure to take proper precautions constitutes negligence, Rav Yochanan rules in accordance with the rabbis that failure to take such precautions doesn't constitute negligence. Why? Because he's only liable when he takes a fee, because he's seen as a paid custodian who's responsible for negligence. But when he doesn't take a fee, he's seen as an unpaid service provider or custodian, and he's not liable for unusual events. In other words, if 99% of the time the animal doesn't flinch, you don't have to tie down the animal. See the difference? Right. Okay. So now that we've got that, the Gemara adduces for the distinction, and Rav Zera said one who wants the slaughterer to be liable in the event that he slaughters an animal properly through an unusual occurrence should give him a dinner before slaughtering the animal. Now, guys, this is the best advice you can ever get from the Gemara. If you take nothing away from this, people that do stuff for you for free, there's always a price. There's no such thing as free sex. There's no such thing as free favors. It all comes with some sort of a price. So what's better, what's better to do is to pay where you can hold somebody accountable. I'm not saying if you can't afford it and there's circumstances where there are no options, guys. But a lack of affordability means you have no options. I'm saying where there are options and there's a stinginess factor. Kev, you're falling asleep a little bit. So what I'm saying is, Kev, where there is stinginess, that's an option. Where there's no affordability, you sometimes have to accept something for free. I'm talking where there are options. Rather pay for a service where you can sue somebody and get the right sort of advice. Sometimes when you get something for people also don't put a lot of energy into anything. There are people that charge commission for services like legal fees if they win a case, etc. They don't put all their energy in because they're not earning. When you can hold them accountable per hour for their fee, they jump. That's the human condition. Am I right, Damon?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're saying, what's the Gemara advising? Give a dinner before slaughtering an animal so you can hold the person to the book. So the Gemara challenges the ruling of Rav Yochanan and Rav Zera, which frees somebody from liability who's an expert that charges without a fee. And that was not openly negligent. By the way, a novice is always held accountable because what the hell is he doing at a profession that he's got no qualification? That automatically makes him liable. So the Gemara is saying that, listen, there's an issue here. If you're saying that somebody's an expert and they're charging, they're liable, but if they're not and it's free, it's a problem. There should be responsibility. How did they challenge it? Just, guys, I'm going as quickly as I can, just quickly. So they challenged it from the following brisa. If one takes wheat to a miller, and the miller did not soak them in water before grinding them, and as a result he processed them into coarse bran or fine bran, instead of the byproduct the person expected because he never did the correct pre-processing, one takes flour to a baker, and the baker baked it into a crumbly bread by not sifting the flour correctly, or somebody who takes an animal to the slaughter and the slaughter slaughtered it improperly and rendered it an availer. All of these cases, the tradesman is liable for the damage because he is like one who takes pay for his work. And when we say one is like one who takes pay for his work, it means he doesn't take pay for his work. Otherwise, he'd said one who takes pay for his work. But it's using the expression like to indicate that he's liable, just like a paid worker, even for unusual occurrences, even when he's not being paid. So a craftsman who fails to perform his job properly is considered negligent because he should know better, he's an expert, and he's not a victim of circumstance. There's another interpretation of the Mishnah that says it doesn't use the word it's like somebody that's able to be paid. It's because he is somebody that's able paid. Okay? Let me just see how much time I've got, guys. I've got a reasonable amount of time. Kevin, you will have plenty of time. Don't worry. Let me just fly through this quickly. So, the Gemara quoted an incident where there was a questionable shchita performed. There was a case of an animal slaughtered with hagrama that came before Rav. Okay? So, the owner of the animal had given it to the slaughterer to shech, and he performed hagrama, which is inclining while slaughtering it. But unfortunately, only a majority of the part was severed properly, and there's a case where it has to be done in one loop or one ring. And this was like a ring and a half. In other words, the shchita has to be valid if it's done in one ring. There is an opinion that if you sever the majority of the specific ring before doing another ring, then the shchita is valid. There are two different opinions of it in Chulinei. So it's a dispute between Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda and the rabbis, where the slaughterer severed a majority of the trachea with one ring, and then inclined the outside of the ring. So the rabbis say, look, even though most of the trachea was cut with the prescribed area, and cutting through most of the trachea suffices for shchita, the shchita, according to the rabbis, is invalid because it has to be in one single ring. Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda says that if the majority of the shchita was done with the prescribed area, it's valid, even if a minority goes out of it. Okay? It's inclined beyond the ring. So that's where they, actually the rabbis are more stringent than Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda. So basically what happens is Rav ruled it's a treifa. And when we use the word treifa, we're not using a treifa where it's got a certain amount of lifespan where the animal is going to die anyway. By the way, that is the definition of a treifa. If an animal is going to die from a sickness, okay, then you can't shecht it. So using this term treifa as in treif versus kosher, that's the note on the Gemara. So you can't use it. Why? Because Rav said you can't use it. And he freed the slaughterer from paying money for the damage. So that's bizarre, because he ruled it treif, meaning that the person that slaughtered it was negligent because it should have been a kosher shchita, and yet he freed the slaughterer from paying money for the damage. So that seems as though the person is losing out twice. Now, Kevin, just as a matter of interest, if we don't finish you, we're going to go on with another link and add you. This is very important, guys. I don't want to repeat it tomorrow. We're almost done. Otherwise, you don't want to repeat this. Trust me. Okay? So we'll send another link for you. Okay, so guys, please concentrate. So the rabbi, Rav ruled a treifa because the majority of the rabbinic opinion says it's treifa, whereas Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda says the majority was in the one ring trachea, so it's fine. But the problem is he freed the slaughterer from paying for the damage. So he's saying, okay, well, so you rule a treifa, fine. Then make the slaughterer pay, because it's like nevela. Or if you rule it kosher, then there's no payment because you can use the animal. So Rav Kahana and Rav Asi met the person, the owner of the animal, and they say to him, Rav did two things for you. Gemara says, like, what are these two things? Perhaps you're going to say that they meant that Rav did two things that were detrimental to the animal owner. That basically Rav wronged him doubly. In other words, first of all, he should have ruled that the animal guys is kosher, in accordance with the more lenient opinion of Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda, but ruled instead more strictly according to the rabbis. But you're saying, okay, that's all right. Even if Rav held that the rabbis more stringently said it's treifa, it's fine. But then he should have given the slaughterer liability to pay the owner for the damage. But you're not allowed to say such a thing. So the Gemara is turning around and saying, well, that's a problem. Because those two people would never have said anything against Rav, because there's a rule in the Brisa that when a judge leaves a courtroom, he can't say to the losing party, pal, listen, I had two other judges ruling against me. I ruled in your favor. The other two, they're my colleagues. What am I going to do? I work with them. I'm not allowed to do that. Okay? It's under the laws of a talebearer. My colleagues outnumbered me. What am I supposed to do? So we are saying that actually Rav Kahana and Rav Asi meant that they were saying that Rav did two things that were beneficial to the animal owner. He said, because what they were saying is you might feel like he was unfair to you, but he actually helped you in two ways, Rav. First thing is he benefited you in that he didn't feed you something that was possibly not kosher. Because according to general rabbinic opinion, it's not kosher. And we know you wouldn't have wanted to eat anything treif. That's number one. And he benefited you from a possible robbery. Why? Because if you want to go according to Rav Asi and say you could have had it, then if you would have taken money for something you could have had, you would have robbed the guy and been responsible in Shemaim for robbery. So not only did he prevent you from eating treif, but he actually prevented you from robbing your fellow and you would have been responsible in Shemaim. Good. Kevin, you've got 2 minutes. Go for it, mate. Teach us.
Okay, so just one thing. I don't know, on this week's Parsha, Vayikra, it discusses towards the end what we've been doing, and it says here, and there's something which we may have not covered. Damon, you must correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so it says here, if a person will sin and act with treachery against Hashem by lying to his comrade about an object deposited for security, or about money for business placed in his hand, or about a robbery, or by defrauding his comrade, or he found a lost item and denied it, and he swore to the falsehood about any of all these things a person can do and sin thereby, then it shall be that when he will sin, become guilty, he shall return the stolen item that he stole, or the proceeds of the fraud that he defrauded, or the object that was deposited for security with him, or the lost item that he found, or anything that he had sworn in this regard falsely. He shall repay it in its principal amount, and a fifth he should add to it. To the one that it belongs to, he shall give it on that day he admits his guilt. Now, this is something that I don't know if you ever covered this. I saw this yesterday. And over and above that, plus the 1/5 and his guilt offering, he shall bring to Hashem a ram that is unblemished from the flock, worth according to his valuation. So did you ever say that? Yeah,
yes,
besides
yes,
the 1/5.
Absolutely. We did.
Okay, geez, I didn't realize that. Okay, so
absolutely, no,
just a refresher. Okay,
so
it's in this week's Parsha.
Guys, we did half a daf today.
Fantastic. So, Damon, can I say something else? I thought I couldn't remember if you said that. So
no, I'm happy. But guys, we did half a daf today, and it was clear as anything.
Well done, guys. Well done, Damon. Thank you.
I'm pushing up the pace. Is it too fast for you guys, or are you catching?
So you finished 99, Damon. You finished page 99.
Yeah, we've got a half a page left, but in principle we're done, eh? We did half a daf.
Yeah, and yeah, it's not overly complicated what we're doing now.
But to give it over in 40 minutes, half a daf is not so easy. With all the commentaries.
Yeah.
Not totally easy.
No, that's why we outsource that function to you.
But it shows
maybe
you what
Arthur can do it. Maybe Arthur's capable.
I can't do my website without Arthur, and I can't get my accounts done without Gavin's expertise in RTX, and I can't know a word of Hebrew without Kevin. I'm a moron. In fact,
no, you're not, Damon.
No,
man.
wrote me